I knew the end of my 12-year tenure was approaching, not because of the quarterly reports or the whispers near the water cooler, but because Bradley Reynolds, our newly appointed interim chief executive officer, had replaced our industrial espresso machine with a cheap combat tap that smelled of old socks. Bradley was the founder Joseph Reynolds' stepson, a man with a bachelor's degree in recreation management and a minor in failing upwards. Bradley had recently decided that the physical plant of Apex Industrial Solutions needed a modern upgrade. For 12 years, I had been the environmental compliance manager for the company. That was a polished way of saying I was the only person standing between a rusting, chemical-belching factory and a federal indictment that would make local news look like a minor parking violation. I knew every valve, every permit, and every liability buried under our concrete foundation. The summons to Bradley's office arrived at 9:15 on a Tuesday morning. The email subject line was Synergy and Realignment. It might as well have said to bring a box for my belongings. I walked into the office, which used to belong to his stepfather. The old room had smelled of leather, pipe smoke, and hard work. Now it resembled a high-tech retail outlet. Everything was glass and brushed aluminum. Bradley sat behind a glass desk that cost more than my vehicle, vaping a sweet concoction that smelled like cotton candy. He wore no socks, just leather loafers that exposed his ankles, which seemed to be the uniform for someone who had never done physical labor. He gestured for me to sit. "Edward, take a seat," he said, pointing to an uncomfortable chair. "We are doing some pivoting today." "Pivoting," I repeated, keeping my voice flat. "I do not do enthusiasm. I handle Environmental Protection Agency audits and hazardous waste manifests." "Exactly," Bradley smiled, using a condescending tone that usually belongs to people who think buying cryptocurrency makes them financial experts. "We value your tenure here, Edward, but we are moving toward a more agile, cloud-native approach to compliance. We need fresh eyes, digital natives." I stared at him. "Bradley, the Environmental Protection Agency is not cloud-native. They are federal agents with clipboards and authority, who measure parts per million of chemicals in the soil. I built our compliance system from scratch. It is not an app you download from a store." He waved his hand. "We have hired a consultancy firm, Green Tech Vision. They are going to automate your workflow. So we are letting you go, effective immediately." I could hear the hum of the ventilation system outside his window, specifically Unit 4, which I knew had a worn belt that needed to be replaced next week, or the filtration system would fail. I knew that, but he did not. "You are firing me," I said, clarifying the management jargon. "We are right-sizing," he corrected, tapping his vape pen. "Hand over your badge and laptop. Security is outside to help you collect your personal items." I stood up and felt a strange calm wash over me. It was the same calm I felt when I found a leaking drum of solvent years ago and had to coordinate a response team while the plant manager panicked in the corner. "Bradley," I said, "just so we are clear, you are terminating my access, taking my computer, and telling me my services are no longer required." "That is the legal reality, yes," he replied. "Sign here for the severance. It was 2 weeks of pay. 2 weeks of pay after 12 years of keeping this aging factory compliant. 2 weeks of pay for preventing fines that would bankrupt the business." I reached into my pocket, pulled out my worn plastic badge, and placed it on the glass desk. It made a sharp click. I set the laptop next to it. "The password is under the keyboard," I told him. "But Bradley, the compliance system is not just files on a machine." "We have it covered, Edward," he dismissed, looking at his phone. "Do not be bitter." I was not bitter. I was ready. I walked out with a security guard walking behind me. It was Peter Higgins, a man I had shared coffee with for a decade. He looked at the floor in shame. "I am sorry, Edward," Peter muttered as we reached the gate. "Do not worry, Peter," I said, stepping onto the public sidewalk. "Just do me a favor and keep your head down tomorrow morning around 8 o'clock. "Why?" Peter asked. "What is happening then?" "The past is coming to collect," I replied. See, Bradley had made one critical mistake. He assumed compliance was a department. It was not. It was me, and he assumed the automated reports were company property. They were not. They were custom scripts running on my private credentials, linked to my personal encryption keys, designed to require a confirmation from me every 24 hours. If I did not log in by 7:52 in the morning to confirm I was active, the system defaulted to transparency mode. I got into my 2016 Ford Escape and looked back at the glass building. Bradley was probably celebrating, thinking he had saved $85,000 a year. He had not saved money. He had just pulled the pin on a financial grenade. You have to understand the nature of industrial manufacturing in our region. It is not clean code and comfortable chairs. It is a constant, violent war against entropy, gravity, and chemical reactions. Our plant manufactured specialized coatings for automotive parts. To make those coatings, we used compounds with names that had more syllables than Bradley had thoughts. We dealt with xylene, toluene, and hexavalent chromium, chemicals that require strict handling. For the last decade, my job was not just completing paperwork. I was the handler of the beast. The system Bradley thought he could hand over to a consultant was a complex network of the databases I had built out of spreadsheets, custom programming scripts, and necessity. We had permits from the county, the state, and the federal government. Each had different reporting requirements. The county wanted to know about minor oil spills. The feds wanted to know about air emissions. I had a calendar in my head for every task. Mondays, check the acidity levels in the outflow tanks. If it was too high, the city fined us $10,000. Wednesdays, audit the hazardous waste storage. If a drum sat there for more than 90 days, it was a major federal violation costing $37,500 per day. Fridays, I prepared the air emissions report, the big one that proved we were not polluting the neighborhood. Bradley did not know about the details. He did not know that sensor 3 on the north stack always read high because a bird nested near it years ago. I had to manually deduct 12% from the reading to get the actual number. If you reported the raw number, you confessed to a violation. If you reported 0, you lied to the government. You had to report the calibrated calculation. I was the only one who knew the math. I remember when the old chief executive officer, Joseph Reynolds, came to me years ago. He was a difficult man, but he understood the stakes. "Edward," he said, "the inspector is here. Fix it." I walked that inspector through the facility for 4 hours, showing him detailed logs until he was so overwhelmed by my documentation that he signed the certificate just to leave. That was the job, ensuring compliance while patching leaks with patience. But Bradley saw me as a luxury. "Edward just sits at his computer," he probably told the board. He did not realize I had been doing the work of 3 people because of budget cuts. I was the environmental manager, the safety officer, and the technical support for the warehouse staff. When I got home after being fired, I sat in my kitchen. It was functional and slightly outdated. I poured a glass of water and looked at the clock. It was 2 in the afternoon. At the plant, the second shift was starting. Right about now, the thermal oxidizer would spike in temperature. The alarm would sound in my empty office. Usually, I would remotely adjust the fan speed. I looked at my phone, but there were no alerts. I had no access. I imagined the alarm ringing in the empty room. Bradley would walk by, hear it, and think someone else would handle it. But there was no one. The green consultants were not arriving until Monday. Bradley had created a 4-day gap where the plant had no oversight, and then there was the cloud network. The government requires continuous monitoring. Since our hardware was decades old, it could not connect to the internet. So, I wrote a script. The sensors talked to a local machine which talked to my script, and my script uploaded the data to a secure database bucket I managed. The Environmental Protection Agency pulled the data from that database every morning at 8 o'clock. But the account was under my name and paid for with my personal credit card, which I then reported as an expense. I did this because the corporate technology department was too slow to approve a server request years ago, and I needed to avoid a fine. Bradley fired me and took my office computer, but he did not ask for the cloud account credentials. He did not even know the cloud account existed. Sitting at my kitchen table, I opened my personal laptop and logged into the console. The green lights were flickering. The heartbeat of the factory was active. I could have shut it down, but I am compliant. I looked at the tasks. The next execution was tomorrow morning at 7:52. The action was to transmit the daily report to the federal database. I clicked on the script to edit it. Normally, I reviewed the data, filtered out sensor glitches like the bird nest reading, and approved the upload. I disabled the manual review requirement and turned off the error correction algorithm. I told the system to transmit the raw, uncalibrated data directly to the government. The warehouse boys in the packing department always knew when a batch was running hot because the smell of solvent would seep through the double doors. They would call me directly on my line, bypassing the production manager entirely, because they knew I was the only one who actually had the authority to dial back the feed rates without getting screamed at for missing the hourly quotas. A strange silence accompanies a coming disaster. I spent the evening doing ordinary things. I fed my cat, watered my plants, and ate a simple dinner. All the while my laptop sat on the table, its screen glowing. I monitored the raw data coming from the factory. Without my daily calibration adjustments, the numbers looked alarming. The thermal oxidizer was running at 1450 degrees. The permit limit was 1400. The acidity in the water outflow was 9.2, basic enough to damage paint. And the sensor in the mixing room showed a fault. Under my old protocol, a fault would trigger an alert for me to repair the wire. Without the calibration active, the system defaulted to the federal protocol for a dead sensor, which was to assume the worst-case discharge. The computer was going to report that we were discharging maximum contaminants. I thought about calling Bradley, but he had to learn that safety regulations are written in blood and compliance is written in money. He was about to lose a lot of money. I slept well and woke up at 6:30 the next morning. I made coffee and sat in front of my computer at 7:50. The script was counting down. Connection was active to the federal database. I could have stopped it, but Bradley had treated me like refuse. At 7:52, the upload executed. All data packets were sent. The federal server responded with confirmation. The report was now in the government database, a legally binding document stating that Apex Industrial Solutions was operating in violation of the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act. Because the Human Resources team had removed my name from the authorized representative list, the report was submitted under a default system account. I closed my laptop. The clock ticked to 8. The government offices opened, and their automated systems took about 12 minutes to flag critical violations. By 8:15, a red warning was flashing on a dashboard in Chicago. By 9, inspectors were on their way. I sat on my porch, enjoying the quiet. The storm was starting, but it was no longer my responsibility. My former colleagues began texting me at 8:45. Peter Higgins sent a message saying 2 dark vehicles with federal plates had driven past the security gate without stopping. Rachel Davis texted that Bradley had run out of his office looking pale, asking about inspectors and windbreakers. The lead agent, Henderson, met Bradley in the lobby. Bradley tried to offer a polite greeting, but Agent Henderson was direct. "We received a report of a critical chemical release at 7:52 this morning," Agent Henderson said. "Where is Edward Collins?" Bradley stammered that I was no longer with the company. "Firing the license compliance officer without a transition plan is a serious issue," Agent Henderson replied. "Your system reports you are discharging contaminants. We are issuing an immediate shutdown order." Rachel texted me that the sirens were sounding and Bradley was screaming at the consultants. A federal shutdown order is the ultimate penalty. It meant turning off power to the assembly lines and stopping production. Every minute the line was inactive cost the company $4,500. Peter texted that agents were placing yellow tape around the mixing room. Bradley was trying to call his stepfather in Florida, who was on a golf course. Firing me had also triggered another legal disaster. Under the Federal Worker Adjustment and Retraining Notification Act, also known as the Warning Act under 29 U.S.C. Section 2101, a company with over 100 employees cannot execute actions that lead to a plant shutdown without giving 60 days of advance notice to the affected workers. Our facility employed exactly 140 workers. By firing me, the sole operator of the critical compliance system, Bradley had directly caused a federal shutdown, violating the Warning Act and exposing the company to massive liability. Furthermore, as the interim leader, his reckless decision constituted a clear breach of his fiduciary duty to the shareholders, exposing him to personal legal consequences. Agent Henderson and his partner, Agent Barnes, began inspecting the physical flow valves. Agent Barnes was a strict technical investigator. She immediately noted that the raw data submitted to the federal database was completely different from the outdated logs Bradley tried to present. Bradley stood in the control room, sweating through his expensive designer shirt. The consultants from Green Tech Vision were huddled in the corner, staring at their tablets with empty expressions. They had realized that the entire operation was locked, and they did not possess the technical competence to unlock it. The manufacturing lines were silent. The heavy machinery was completely powered down. The silence on the factory floor was the most expensive sound in the entire state of Ohio, and it was costing the business thousands of dollars with every tick of the clock. The state police eventually arrived to assist the EPA in managing the traffic flow outside the main gates. With the production line dead, the cooling towers began to hiss as they vented clean steam, a sound that the entire neighborhood recognized as a sign of trouble. I sat on my porch, listening to that distant hiss, and knowing that Bradley's career was venting along with it. A man like that thinks he can override physics with a PowerPoint presentation. But the real world always wins. By mid-morning, the situation at the plant was chaotic. My phone rang at 10:30, and the display showed the Environmental Protection Agency. I let it go to voicemail. Agent Henderson left a message saying they were on site and needed the calibration records, which the current staff could not locate. I did not call back. I was a private citizen with no obligation to help them. Then Bradley called. I let it ring. He called again immediately. He was panic dialing. I answered on the fourth attempt. "Edward, thank goodness," he said, his voice sounding strained. "There is a misunderstanding. The inspectors are here and they have shut us down. They say there is a leak, but it is a glitch. You know how to fix it, right?" "I do," I replied. "It is a calibration error in the sensor. It requires a manual adjustment based on environmental factors." "Yes," Bradley pleaded, "just log in and fix it. We will pay you for your time." "I cannot do that, Bradley," I said. "I do not work for the company anymore, and accessing your servers without authorization would violate federal computer laws. I will not commit a felony." "Edward, please," he cried. "We are losing $5,000 a minute." "That sounds like a management problem," I said. "You should ask your consultants." I hung up and blocked his number. Then I opened a document on my computer and drafted a proposal for crisis consultation. I typed the retainer fee. Originally, I thought of asking for a year's salary, but then I remembered the 2 weeks of severance and the condescending look on Bradley's face. I deleted the draft and typed $2 million. At 1 o'clock, I received an email from Nancy Foster, the Human Resources Director. She was Bradley's primary enabler. She claimed I was withholding company intellectual property and demanded the credentials for the database gateway, threatening legal action. I replied that all company property had been returned. The credentials belonged to a private database server hosted on my personal account and paid for with my credit card because her department had denied the budget years ago. I attached the email chain from 2917 showing the rejection. I added that I was open to transferring ownership for a fee but was currently busy. By 3 o'clock, the internal messages Rachel was sharing showed total panic. The sales vice president was warning that major automotive clients were threatening to cancel contracts. The operations manager stated that the inspectors had padlocked the main power breakers. Then they realized the full scope of their problem. Even if they had the password, they did not know the calibration logic. They did not know the bird nest adjustment or the sensor offsets. They needed the engineer, not just the password. Beyond the technical issue, there was the matter of my third legal weapon. The calibration algorithm itself was protected under a patent I registered years ago under 35 U.S.C. Section 271. The licensing agreement allowed Apex to use the patented software only while I was employed there. The moment Bradley terminated my employment without cause, the license was revoked ab initio. Any attempt by their consultants to replicate or run my algorithm would constitute willful patent infringement under Section 271, allowing me to sue for triple damages. Corporate counsel Lawrence Wood realized this. He called me at 4 o'clock. "Edward," he said, "we have reviewed the server situation. We need to resolve this today." "What do you want?" I sent him my proposal. Lawrence opened the file and there was a long silence. "Edward, this is $2 million, he gasped. This is extortion. No, Lawrence, I replied. This is a consulting fee to save a $50 million company from losing its license to operate. If the government revokes your permit, the company is worth nothing. Call Joseph Reynolds in Florida and tell him what his stepson did. Lawrence Wood was silent on the other end of the line, and I could hear the faint sound of papers rustling as he frantically flipped through the corporate charter. He knew that the corporate bylaws did not protect Bradley from a breach of fiduciary duty lawsuit if the board of directors found out he had single-handedly halted the factory's production lines. He tried to appeal to my sense of loyalty, mentioning the years we had worked together, but I reminded him that loyalty was a two-way street and 2 weeks of severance was a dead end. Lawrence was an experienced lawyer, and he knew they had no defense. He tried to argue that my patent was developed during company hours, but I pointed him to the specific clause in my contract that carved out individual patents for custom-coded scripts. He sighed and told me he would have to call the founder. I hung up the phone and walked to the window. The factory chimneys were completely clear. The air was clean, and the silence from the industrial park was golden. I knew that every hour of silence was another $100,000 of leverage for me. I made myself a cup of fresh coffee and waited for the inevitable. I remembered when Joseph Reynolds first bought the land in the late 80s. The soil was already contaminated from the previous owners, and he spent his entire life savings trying to clean it up so he could build a viable business. Bradley did not care about that history. To him, the plant was just an asset to be stripped, a line item on a balance sheet that could be leveraged to boost his personal profile. He had no respect for the sweat that built the foundation, and now the foundation was crumbling under his feet. At 5:15 in the afternoon, my phone rang with a Florida area code. It was the founder, Joseph Reynolds. He was a stern man, but he understood reality. "Edward, what is happening?" Joseph demanded. "My stepson says you are holding our data hostage and wanting $2 million. "I am not holding anything hostage, Joseph," I explained. "The data is on my private server because your staff refused to pay for it years ago. Bradley fired me without a transition plan, and the system reported raw data. Firing me also violated the Warning Act, and your company is currently infringing on my calibration patent. The plant is losing millions every day." Joseph swore under his breath. "I should not have let his mother convince me to put him in charge," he muttered. "If I pay this fee, can you resolve the issue with the government?" "I can," I said. "I have the historical logs to prove it was a sensor error. I can file an amended report and get the shutdown lifted. But if I return, Bradley does not speak to me. If he comes near me, the price doubles." Joseph laughed. "Fair enough. You are a professional, Edward. I should have kept you in charge. I will have legal prepare the papers." I told him I would not touch a keyboard until the $2 million was secured in an escrow account. The documents arrived at 6:30. I signed them, and by 7:45, my bank confirmed the transfer. I put on my work boots and drove to the plant. Peter Higgins opened the gate with a smile. Bradley was waiting in the lobby, looking defeated and disheveled. "You really did this," he muttered. I looked at him. "I did not do this, Bradley. I charged you a stupidity tax." I walked into the conference room where Agent Henderson was waiting. I plugged my laptop into the projector and showed the correlation between the high humidity and the sensor fault. I provided 3 years of manual logs to prove my calculations were accurate. By 10 o'clock, Agent Henderson was satisfied. The shutdown order was lifted. I turned to the consultants and handed them a paper with a password. "The code is written in custom programming language with 40,000 lines, and no comments," I said. "Good luck." I walked out. I had my money, but I was not done. The next morning, I saw Bradley posting on social media claiming he had successfully navigated a minor regulatory challenge through agile leadership. He was taking credit for my work. I opened a private browser and sent a complete archive of our safety emails to the main industry watchdog publication. The emails showed that Bradley had repeatedly rejected my requests for safety equipment upgrades to fund office renovations. The story was published by 11:30. By noon, our biggest automotive client suspended their contract. Bradley was terminated by his stepfather that afternoon. His reputation was ruined. 3 months later, I am sitting on the porch of my new home in Florida. I bought a place near the water where my cat can relax. The neighborhood was quiet, filled with palm trees and the scent of jasmine. I had spent the last 3 months learning how to relax, a skill I had completely forgotten during my 12 years of constant crisis management at Apex. I bought a small boat, nothing fancy, just something to take out onto the calm waters of the bay on Sunday mornings. My cat, Mr. Business, had adjusted well to his new environment, spending his afternoons chasing lizards across the warm stone tiles of the porch. I had no regrets about the way I left. In our industry, people like Bradley think they can treat the operational foundation of the business as disposable overhead. They forget that the structures of compliance and environmental safety are what keep the walls from collapsing inward. When they cut corners, they eventually run out of space to run. I heard that Apex was acquired by a competitor. Rachel Davis is now the chief financial officer of the new firm, and Peter Higgins is the director of security. They asked me to return as a vice president, but I sent them a picture of my feet in the sand. People talk about quiet quitting. I did not do that. I did a complete professional and compliant departure. And when I look at my bank account, I know I made the right decision. I open my computer, log into the server console, and delete the database instance. The past is finished. I look out at the water, feeling satisfied. My name is Edward, and I finally compliance tested my own life. I watched the sun set over the Gulf of Mexico, the warm breeze rustling the palm leaves. The sound of the waves replaced the hum of the factory ventilation. I was a free man, and Bradley was a lesson in the dangers of arrogance. I took a sip of my drink, knowing that the regulatory framework I had guarded for so long had finally served its ultimate purpose. It had protected me. The local zoning board here is much friendlier than the EPA Region 5 Compliance Division, and the only audits I have to deal with now are checking the temperature of my pool. I spent years protecting people who did not appreciate the risk, and it was a relief to finally be responsible only for myself. Mr. Business seems to agree, as his anxiety has completely vanished since we moved. He no longer hides under the sofa when the wind blows, having embraced the easy rhythm of the coast.